Oh, hello there. Yes, well, that storm's passed, hasn't it? Yes, but once one storm's gone, there's always another one waiting in the wings, isn't there? Yes. I used to believe when I was younger that, well, being the good boomer that I am, that there was this notion of progression, that things would actually get better. But I've come to realise as I'm older, a bit like Tony Benn did, that each generation must fight its battles anew. Yes, there's always a new storm that's just about to burst. And the latest one, of course, is everything that I used to hate about homophobia back in the 70s, 80s and 90s, which has come rolling back at us with basically the same group of people attached to it. They just look slightly different, perhaps borrowing from a phrase of George Orwell's. Anyway, yes, we do have the same recycled homophobia, except of course we don't mind gay people anymore, do we? No, we just don't like certain things about pride and flags and pink things and stuff like that, but everything else is fine. I do actually think that we'll get to the stage whereby there will be a right-wing government in this country which will pass quite horrendous laws against gay people, in the same way that, for example, you can think of the laws in Florida which were passed against trans people but got known as the Don't Say Gay law. I think we'll get the same thing, and we'll get all those people on GB News that will sit on those stools who are gay, but they'll be protected because they'll be the right sort of gay. They won't be the bad gays. A bit like, we get presented as the right sorts of Muslims, the good Muslims who we can respect because they're good ones, but not the bad ones. No, indeed. And a few choice examples. A few days ago we had this one in the Telegraph, which is trans teachers must be allowed to use the same showers as female colleagues. Schools told. Yes, indeed. Perfect storm, isn't it, that one? You've got schools and toilets and trans people and children. What a perfect mixture that is. They're dangerous, aren't they? You don't want to trust them, do you? Schools with children. Oh, no, hang on. No, trans with children. That's it, isn't it? Yes. And inevitably, if you notice with the subheader, CEO of human rights charity Sex Matters brands National Governance Association training is closely responsible. Yes. Because in the piece itself, it doesn't actually say that. Of course, it doesn't at all. And lots of these things I keep pointing out here are merely guidance for actual adults that can make up their own minds rather than rather nasty bigots that read the Daily Telegraph. But of course we have to have somebody from Sex Matters, don't we? All three of them. Yes, Julie Blindell occasionally, very occasionally, but it's almost always, isn't it? Yeah, it's almost always Maya or Helen, of course, because, they do represent so many people, don't they? Along with James Esses and Glinner and who else? You get a couple of people, don't you? Like maybe Doyle and of course J.K. Rowling, and they represent so many people out there who magically, when push comes to shove, don't actually appear to exist necessarily. We'll come on to that one. I did have to smile again at the weekend. This particular one from Twitter, which was doing the rounds, which was somebody who was complaining bitterly that if you type certain words into Word, it will suggest that you don't use them. In this case, maternity leave, which they've suggested wasn't very inclusive. Now, I've recently bought a new Microsoft laptop, and having freshly installed Word, I thought I'd try it. So here are my attempts here. What I think this person has done is I think they've actually turned on certain things themselves, which means they're presented with different options in terms of inclusivity, which does go back to that kind of Mary Whitehouse notion about, well, if you don't want that, then turn it off, because certainly my version of Word, which is as up to date as it can be, doesn't have that as a feature. Or just maybe, I don't know, maybe with AI these days it can just sniff out a bigot and have a bit of a laugh with them. Anyway, yeah, language is so important, isn't it? Yes. But at the root of this, as I've said, is effectively the old-fashioned homophobia. It is simply dressed up. Back in the 80s and 90s, people were killed because they were gay. Pub I used to go to in Bradford. The only gay pub in Bradford. Yeah, it's the only one. One night there was a guy who used to work there as a bottle collector, glass collector, and he didn't come back. The reason he hadn't come back was because he'd been beaten to death in a toilet. because he was gay. Huge unsolved crime. Huge unsolved crime. To this day, we don't know who did it because the police weren't that keen or interested in actually following up the evidence for it. You can see this stuff on the internet if you want to chase it up. But people get killed. This is the thing. Whenever you use this language, and why language is important, actually is important, because if you're not on the receiving end of that language, it doesn't really matter. And you will notice, for example, lots of people in my comments that aren't going to be on the receiving end of things, and therefore they can quite happily say that things don't exist, like trans people, for example. But when you're actually on the receiving end of those things, when you're on the receiving end of that fist, it feels mighty real. It feels that if you have to worry about leaving a pub as to who's watching you, that your life really is potentially in danger. Not to do with toilets or children or spurious people that live in Tufton Street, but other things. Just the nasty bigots that are always emboldened whenever they see this stuff. And it's everywhere. Everything that you see in the media is controlled by a small handful of nasty bigots who will insist on things, even when they're not true. Which brings us neatly perhaps to the Cass review, which is always held up magically as something that's, well, just great, isn't it? Yeah, it justifies everything. Even though lots of things that are in the Cass review, or rather aren't in the Cass review, are are actually with us. The ban on puberty blockers, for example, which isn't in Cass, is with us for no medical reason whatsoever. And the latest of these particular attempts is the basic clampdown on anyone under 25 in terms of receiving any gender-affirming care. I don't really know how we can live in a country where people under 25, who are adults, who can make up their own minds, etc., about things, magically, going to have to stop using that word, I know, but magically become incompetent. Now, there is a legal definition of incompetent adults. It's often applied to people in care homes, but you're just actually applying that to certain people simply because you don't like them. And that is a very, very dodgy and dangerous slope, as all of our right-wing commentators full well know, but somehow don't actually manage to apply to trans people. The biggie, as lots of people have pointed out, is this one. Trans and non-binary categories added to official forms for reporting the death of a child as part of a divisive gender recognition reforms. Yes, because again, that small handful of people, that tiny number of people at Sex Matters, were jumping up and down about the idea that we might actually record somebody's gender identification at their death. I'll just quote this for you. Labour MP Charlotte Nichols has called for changes to the Gender Recognition Act. Of course, the one bit of legislation they have to go for. It's the one bit of legislation they have to go for, because nobody should ever on an official document be called something that they don't want to exist. That's the issue. Following the murder of 16-year-old Brianna Gray last year, to allow transgender people who are deceased to be legally remembered by the gender they live by. Yes, but while the change may be welcomed by some, it has attracted criticism. Really? Tory spokesman for Women and Equalities, Mims Davis, said it's a deep insensitivity for families to then be asked if their late child was trans or non-binary in order to tick boxes for NHS diversity quotas. Yes, isn't it? Not something. Why would it be deeply insensitive to ask somebody to tick a simple box on a form? And the answer is, well, I'm transphobic and I wouldn't want to do that. How dare you ask me hypothetically to do something and I'll pass a law which means you don't have to do it? Because I don't want to have to accept that certain people may exist, because then I'd have to maybe change my view of the world. Yes, wouldn't you? Just. Helen Joyce, there she is, from charity Sex Matters, there it is, said this ill-conceived, agenda-driven, question needs to be dropped immediately. Why? Well, the answer's blindingly obvious, because if we start, for example, recording the fact that certain teenagers are committing suicide because they've been denied gender-affirming care, then suddenly we might have to deal with the fact that it might actually be a problem, and the language that we use and the blanket coverage that we get in the British media might actually be a problem because it's stirring up hatred towards people. Maybe, yes. And, of course, we have the inevitable interview between Julia Hartley-Brewer and James S's from yesterday, because he's written another document that he really wants you to sign. Yes, the last one he tried was the Declaration of Biological Reality, which attracted nearly 1 in 5,000 adults to sign it, because that's the number of bigots like him there are in the country. But here he is, being given his platform, a man with no qualifications for working with children, a man who had a lot of problems working with children, but nobody ever questions him, because Julia Hartley-Brewer isn't in that business. She's in the business of giving these people a platform because they can spew bile and hatred to people that she feels deserve it. As I say, I would have thought by now that as a society we'd moved on, and the argument will be, yeah, well, we don't mind gay people. And one way I'm seeing it is, I think that's going to be next on the list, because James writes an awful lot about pride flags, and he equates the pride flag and indeed other expressions from gay and bisexual people with trans. That's the next thing on the list, isn't it? Because James is a bigot, I'm afraid. It would be nice if he wasn't, and it would certainly be nice if he wasn't allowed to monetise that particular bigotry. But unfortunately we don't live in that sort of world. Oh dear. Anyway, do have a lovely day. Enjoy the weather. Now that particular storm has passed. Yeah, maybe buy an umbrella.